Dear students, today we are going to start the new chapter Data File Handling. Before that, I want to ask you one thing. Do you know what is the difference between volatile memory and non volatile memory? You studied these terms in your small classes, isn't it? I think when you were in third standard, you studied about volatile and non volatile memory. Likewise, we have persistent programs and transient programs. Do you know what is the meaning of transient and persistent? Transient means temporary, persistent means permanent. So, we did so many programs in our computer lab, isn't it? Suppose you completed one program and you want to run that program, and at that time you just input some values, and according to that value and program you got some output. Now after some time again you want to run the same program. What happened? Again we want to enter another value as input. Then what happened to the first value we inputted or we given as input? That was lost. So when we run transient programs, they run for a short time and produce some output, but when they end, their data disappears. If you run the program again, it starts with a clean slate. That means again it starts as a new program. Transient programs are not able to store the values. This happens because the data entered is executed inside primary memory RAM, which is volatile in nature. Then we are going to look at what is persistent programs. Persistent programs run for a long time. They keep at least some of their data in permanent storage, that is in hard drive. And if they shut down or restart, they execute from the same point. Examples of persistent programs are operating systems, which run whenever a computer is switched on, and web servers, which run all the time waiting for requests to come in on the network. So persistent means when we use persistent programs, these programs store the data into hard drive. Because of that, hard drives are non-volatile, so they just store the data as permanent. So in this chapter, we are going to study how to write persistent programs. That means in Python, if we want to store data as persistent or program as persistent, we should use file. We should use file. So that is the importance of file. Other programs are transistent. When we use file, when we use the concept file, that is persistent. Then did you heard about file? In terms of computer, different other types of files, but we discussed about file in terms of Python programming language. So file is a document or data stored on a permanent storage device which can be read, written or rewritten according to requirement. In other words, data is packaged upon the storage device as data structures called files. A file is a named place on the disk where a sequence of related data is stored. So all files are assigned a name that is used for identification purpose by the operating system and the user. All the files should have a name. In Python, files are simply stream of data, so the structure of data is not stored in the file along with data. So in Python, data is stored in file as simply as data. They are not ready to store the structure of the data. File input output means transfer of data from secondary memory to main memory or main memory to secondary memory. As you know, secondary memory store data permanently. When we working with computer system, file or document stored on the hard disk is brought into RAM for executing and vice versa. That means user asks to data and user get data from RAM, but RAM got data from hard disk. So there is a three-way process. First, the user places a request. User places the request to the RAM. So RAM want to fetch that data from hard disk. Then what happened? Hard disk send the data to RAM and RAM send the data to user. User is not able to directly access data from secondary storage device, that means hard disk. User is able to get the data from the hard disk only by the help of or with the help of RAM. Vice versa, hard disk is not able to directly access data from user. It get data only from the RAM. So there is a two-way process instead of two-way, three-way. First, user to RAM, RAM to hard disk to RAM, RAM to user. Hope you understood. Now we are going to discuss why we are going to use files. Data maintained inside the file is termed as persistent data. It is permanent in nature. Python allows us to read data from and save data to external text files permanently on secondary storage media. So we are able to read data from the data file and we are able to save data to external text file permanently on secondary storage media. Sometimes we permanently store the program's data as Python script. Do you know what is Python script? Python script program with the extension .py. Data is stored using files permanently on secondary storage media. We usually use the files to store data permanently while working and storing data in word processing applications, spreadsheets, PPT, etc. All these operations requires data to be stored in files so that it may be used later. So why we are using data permanently? Because we want to use that data in our future. That is why for the future we save the data, isn't it? That is the purpose of file also. We want to save the values for future. Now we are going to study about basic operations on file. First, before working with files, we want to open the file. So after that, first we want to open the file, then only we are able to do any work on that particular file. After that, completing all the works, we should close the file. So first we want to open the file. After that, performing different operations, like which are the operations we are able to perform on a file. We are able to read from the file, we are able to write to the file, and we are able to save data, and sometimes some other processes are there. We are able to append data, delete data, etc. So three main steps are: first we want to open the file, second we want to perform the operation, decide operation, and last one is we should close the file. So basic operations performed on a data file are naming a file. Naming a file means creating a file, opening a file, reading data from the file, writing data in the file, closing a file. So reading data from the file, writing data in the file, that is optional according to our requirement. Sometimes we want to read data from the file, sometimes we want to write data to the file, sometimes we want to read and write together. Now we are going to look at file processing. Using the basic operations, we can process files in many ways, such as creating a file, traversing a file for displaying the data on screen, appending data in a file, inserting data in a file, deleting data from the file, creating a copy of a file, updating data in a file. So, by using opening a file and performing an operation and closing the file, we are able to different operations in a file, like creating a file, traversing a file for displaying data on the screen. Traversing means what? Traversing means traveling through that entire file. Appending data in a file, that means we are able to add some another information to the existing file. Inserting data in a file, sometimes we are able to insert some other things to the file. Deleting data from a file, we are able to delete data from the file. Creating a copy of a file, sometimes we want to take a copy of an existing file, that is also possible. And updating data in a file, updation also possible. Updation means sometimes we want to change data inside a file. So these are the main basic operations which we are able to perform with our files.